I'm Robert, 28 male. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment that I'm quite proud of, filled with books and the quiet hum of my custom-built computer. As a data analyst, my world revolves around finding patterns in chaos, making sense of jumbled numbers, and revealing the truth hidden beneath the surface of a spreadsheet. It's a job that requires patience and precision, qualities I thought I had in abundance. But I never imagined I'd have to turn that analytical eye on my own family, to quantify years of neglect and chart the flow of affection as if it were a financial asset. My life was stable until a screech of tires and a flash of shattered glass sent me to the hospital, where I learned that the only thing more painful than a broken bone is a broken bond. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my family home was less of a home and more of a showroom. My mother, Helen, was an interior designer with a portfolio of chic, minimalist houses that looked better in magazines than they did to live in. Every cushion had its place, every surface was polished to a reflective sheen, and every conversation felt just as curated. My father, George, a real estate developer, saw the world in terms of value, investments, and curb appeal. Their marriage was a partnership built on a shared aesthetic and a relentless pursuit of success, a vision embodied perfectly by my older brother, Daniel. Daniel was 4 years my senior, and from my earliest memories, he was the sun around which our family orbited. He was a natural salesman, charming and confident, with a smile that could disarm any skepticism. He played the right sports in high school, got into the right university, and landed a coveted job as an investment banker right out of college. He was, in my father's words, a blue-chip asset. My parents' pride in him was palpable. It was in the way they'd steer every dinner conversation toward his latest deal, the way my mother would hang framed newspaper clippings of his collegiate achievements in the hallway, and the way my father's voice would swell with importance when he introduced him to business associates. Daniel was their masterpiece, the living proof of their success. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the observer. While Daniel was out scoring goals, I was inside teaching myself how to code. While he was networking at parties, I was building complex datasets just for the fun of it. My passions were less glamorous, less visible, and in the eyes of my parents, less valuable. They supported my education, of course. It was a necessary part of the image, but they never truly understood it. My job as a data analyst was a mystery to them. "So you work with computers?" my mother would ask, her tone suggesting it was a slightly embarrassing hobby that I'd thankfully managed to monetize. My father would just nod and say, "As long as it pays the bills, son." The difference in their treatment of us wasn't overtly cruel. It was more like a persistent, low-grade hum of dismissal. For Daniel's 25th birthday, my parents threw a lavish party at a downtown hotel, inviting over 100 of their friends and colleagues. For mine, my mother sent me a gift certificate for a department store and a text that read, "Happy birthday, call us sometime." When Daniel got his first big bonus, my father took him to a high-end dealership and co-signed a loan for a luxury car. When I got a significant raise after leading a critical project at my firm, I mentioned it over the phone, and my father's only response was, "That's nice, Robert. Now, have you heard what your brother just closed on?" The financial support was the most tangible aspect of this disparity. Daniel was always in need of a little bridge loan for a new investment, a helping hand for a down payment on a condo, or a strategic investment in his ever-growing portfolio of expensive suits and watches. My parents were always happy to oblige. It was all part of building the brand, they'd say. For me, things were different. I had worked part-time jobs all through college to minimize my student loans. When my 10-year-old car finally gave out, I spent months saving for a down payment on a reliable second-hand sedan. I never asked them for money, partly out of pride, but mostly because I knew the answer would be a lecture on fiscal responsibility, a lecture they never seemed to give my brother. My friend Sarah saw it all. We'd known each other since middle school, and she was the only person who understood the strange dynamic of my family. It's like they see Daniel as an extension of themselves and you as a distant relative they have to be polite to at holidays, she told me once over coffee. As a paramedic, Sarah dealt with real life-or-death crises every day, which gave her a no-nonsense perspective on things. She didn't have time for pretense, and she could spot my family's brand of passive neglect from a mile away. "They don't deserve your effort, Rob," she'd say, but I kept trying. I kept calling, kept showing up to family events, kept hoping that one day they would see me. Not as a data point or a checkbox on their list of parental duties, but as their son. I craved their approval, or at the very least their acknowledgement, with a quiet desperation that I was ashamed to admit even to myself. This dynamic was never more apparent than on the day of my brother's big promotion. He had been made vice president at his firm, a huge achievement that naturally required a grand celebration. My mother had been planning it for weeks, renting out a private room at one of the city's most expensive restaurants. The event was scheduled for a Friday night. I had it marked on my calendar, and despite my reservations, I planned to be there to put on my best suit and my most convincing smile, and to once again play my role as the supportive, less successful younger brother. I wanted to show them that I was a part of the family, that his success was something we could all celebrate together. I imagined myself raising a glass, offering a sincere toast, and maybe, just maybe, feeling a flicker of genuine familial warmth. But fate, as it turns out, had a much colder, more clarifying evening in store for me. On that same Friday afternoon, on my way home from work, a distracted driver ran a red light. The sound was the first thing that registered, a deafening shriek of tires that seemed to stretch on for an eternity, followed by a violent, concussive boom that felt like the world was collapsing in on itself. My head slammed against the side window, and for a moment everything went white. The next thing I knew, I was blinking up at a concerned face in a paramedic's uniform, the scent of antiseptic and gasoline filling the air. It was a surreal, disjointed experience. I remember the flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue, the careful hands stabilizing my neck, and the sharp, searing pain in my leg that made me gasp every time I tried to move. My friend Sarah wasn't on the responding team, but it felt like she was there in spirit. The paramedics were calm, professional, and reassuring, a stark contrast to the panic I felt rising in my chest. They cut me out of the mangled remains of my car and loaded me onto a stretcher. The journey to the hospital was a blur of sirens and bumps in the road, each one sending a fresh wave of agony through my body. Once there, I was wheeled into the emergency room, a chaotic world of beeping machines and hushed, urgent voices. A doctor confirmed what I already suspected. My left leg was badly broken, a clean fracture of the tibia and fibula. I also had a concussion and a collection of deep bruises that were already turning a nasty shade of purple. I would need surgery to set the leg, which meant I'd be staying for at least a few days. As I lay in a curtained-off bay, a nurse handed me my phone, which had miraculously survived the crash with only a cracked screen. My first instinct was to call my parents. My voice was shaky as I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Robert, is everything okay? We're just about to head out for Daniel's dinner." Her voice was rushed, distracted. "Mom, I've been in an accident," I managed to say, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "A car accident. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking who it was. "An accident?" she repeated, her tone a strange mixture of annoyance and obligatory concern. "Oh goodness, are you all right?" "My leg is broken, I need surgery," I told her, hoping the gravity of my words would sink in. "And I have a concussion." "Oh, that's terrible," she said, but her sympathy sounded scripted. "Just awful. Well, listen, the reservation is for 8 o'clock and we can't be late. Daniel has clients coming. It's a very important night for him. You know how it is. We'll try to stop by tomorrow, okay? Just text us the room number when they give you one. We'll be thinking of you." And before I could say anything else, she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. They weren't coming. My brother's promotion dinner was more important than their son lying in a hospital bed with a broken leg. The shock was so profound, it momentarily eclipsed the physical pain. I felt a cold, hollow feeling spread through my chest. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe they didn't understand how serious it was. Maybe they thought it was just a minor fender bender. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Even if it were a sprained ankle, shouldn't a parent want to see their child? The next person I called was Sarah. When she heard my voice, she immediately went into professional mode. "Which hospital? What are your injuries? I'm on my way." She didn't ask if I needed her, she just came. She showed up 20 minutes later, still in her uniform, her presence a comforting anchor in the chaos. She spoke to the doctors, translated the medical jargon for me, and held my hand while they put a temporary cast on my leg. She was the one who was there when they moved me to a room upstairs, who made sure I had water and who fluffed my pillows. She was being the family that my own family couldn't be bothered to be. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. Sarah stayed until I was settled in for the night, only leaving after I promised I would call her the second I woke up. The room was dark save for the faint glow of the city lights through the window. Loneliness descended on me like a shroud. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over social media apps out of habit, and that's when I saw it. My mother had just posted a new album of photos on Facebook. The title was, "Celebrating Our Amazing Son Daniel's Promotion, So Proud." The first picture was a group shot. There they were, my mother, my father, and Daniel, all beaming at a fancy restaurant table. My mother was wearing a sparkling new dress, my father was in his best suit, and Daniel was holding up a glass of champagne, his smile wide and triumphant. They were surrounded by friends and colleagues, all raising their glasses in a toast. They looked so happy, so proud, so utterly carefree. There were more photos, Daniel posing with his boss, my parents laughing with other guests, a close-up of the ridiculously expensive-looking dessert. In every single shot, there was not a hint of worry or concern. They were living in a different reality, a world in which their other son wasn't lying in a hospital bed a few miles away. I scrolled through the images, each one a fresh stab of pain. I saw the comments flooding in, "Congratulations, Daniel. You raised a wonderful son, Helen and George. What a beautiful family." I felt a profound, gut-wrenching loneliness and isolation so complete it felt like I was suffocating. I was looking at a picture of my family and I had never felt more like an outsider. It wasn't just that they chose the dinner over me. It was the joy, the effortless, uncomplicated joy on their faces. My crisis hadn't even registered as a blip on their radar. It was in that cold, sterile hospital room, illuminated by the cheerful glow of my family's celebration on a tiny screen, that the shattered illusion of my place in their lives finally crumbled to dust. The pain in my leg was nothing compared to the agony in my heart. The surgery went well. A skilled orthopedic surgeon pieced my tibia back together with a titanium rod, a permanent piece of hardware that would forever remind me of the night my family celebrated while I was broken. The days that followed were a monotonous blur of pain medication, physical therapy assessments, and the bland, uninspiring meals that hospitals are famous for. My parents did eventually visit 2 days after the accident. They arrived on Sunday afternoon, bearing a generic fruit basket and an air of perfunctory obligation. "Robert, darling, you look so pale," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek. She surveyed the hospital room with a critical eye as if assessing its design flaws. "This lighting is just dreadful." My father stood awkwardly by the door, hands in his pockets. "Tough break, son. The doctor said you'll be on your feet in a few months, right?" He sounded like he was discussing a minor business setback. They asked a few token questions about the accident and the surgery, but their attention was clearly elsewhere. Their conversation quickly drifted back to its usual subject, Daniel. "Daniel's boss was so impressed with him the other night," my mother gushed. "He said Daniel has a real future at the firm." The dinner was a huge success. "We've got the photos back, they look great," my father added, pulling out his phone. "Look at this one of your mother with the CEO's wife." I just stared at them, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. They were talking about the dinner they chose over me. They were showing me photos from the very event that had been a dagger to my heart just 48 hours earlier. Did they have any idea how that felt? Did they even care? I wanted to scream, to ask them how they could be so callous, so utterly blind to my pain. But I didn't. I just nodded numbly and said, "Looks nice." The visit lasted less than 20 minutes. They had a brunch reservation to get to. As they left, my mother patted my arm and said, "Now you focus on getting better, don't worry about us." The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. After I was discharged, Sarah helped me get settled back in my apartment. My leg was in a massive cast, and I was on crutches, which made navigating my small space a challenge. My company was Inker. Dibly supportive, allowing me to work from home while I recovered. Confined to my apartment with nothing but my computer and my thoughts for company, I found my mind drifting back not just to the accident but to my entire life. The hospital incident wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much larger disease. It was the most glaring example of a pattern that had been running in the background for 28 years. As a data analyst, my instinct is to look for patterns, to quantify the abstract. So I started doing what I do best. I began to collect data. I opened a new spreadsheet, a blank slate, and I started to compile a lifetime of receipts, not financial ones at first, but emotional ones. I made columns for birthdays, holidays, graduations, and major life events. I documented every missed phone call, every forgotten milestone, every dismissive comment. The high school graduation where they left early to take Daniel to a networking opportunity. The college graduation they missed entirely because it conflicted with their vacation in Tuscany. The time I won a prestigious award at my first job and told them, only to have my mother interrupt to ask if I'd remembered to send Daniel a birthday card. Each memory I logged was a data point in a growing chart of neglect. It was painful, like reopening old wounds, but it was also strangely validating. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being overly sensitive. The data was clear. The disparity was quantifiable. There was a clear and consistent pattern of preferential treatment. My recovery was slow. The physical pain was a constant, throbbing reminder of the accident, but the emotional clarity I was gaining felt like its own form of healing. Sarah was my rock through it all. She'd come over after her long shifts, bringing takeout and a healthy dose of reality. "What you're doing is good, Rob," she said one evening, looking at the complex spreadsheet on my monitor. You're finally acknowledging the truth. You can't heal from a wound you pretend doesn't exist. It was during one of these quiet evenings that my curiosity shifted from the emotional to the financial. I remembered all the times my parents had talked about making investments in Daniel's future. I remembered my father, the accountant-turned-developer, priding himself on his meticulous financial records. He had always been technologically challenged, and a few years ago, I had helped him set up his online banking and financial management software. I still had the login details saved in my password manager, as he'd often call me for help navigating the system. He trusted me with the technical details, never imagining I might one day scrutinize the content. A seed of an idea began to form in my mind. What if I could quantify the financial disparity as well? What if I could see in black and white exactly how much they had propped up my brother's success? It felt like a violation of privacy, but at the same time, their actions had been a violation of trust. They had broken the unspoken contract of family, the one that says you show up when your child is in the hospital. My analytical brain buzzed with the possibility. The patterns, the outliers, the hidden transactions, it was a data set waiting to be explored. Lying on my couch, my broken leg propped up on a stack of pillows, I made a decision. I was going to follow the money. I was going to conduct a quiet, secret audit of my own family. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew one thing for sure. The truth was in the numbers, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to face it. Logging into my father's financial accounts felt like crossing a point of no return. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of guilt and grim determination. I told myself this wasn't about snooping, it was about seeking the truth. For years, I had accepted their narrative. Daniel was the self-made success, the financial prodigy, while I was the plodding, stable, but unremarkable son. Now I had the tools to verify that narrative and a growing suspicion that it was a carefully constructed fiction. My father, George, was meticulous. Every transaction was categorized, every statement was saved. It was a data analyst's dream. I started with the main checking and savings accounts, exporting years of transaction history into a new spreadsheet. The first thing I did was create a simple filter for Daniel's name. The results were staggering. There were hundreds of transactions, a steady stream of cash flowing from my parents' accounts to his. They weren't huge, dramatic sums at first, but a consistent drip, drip, drip of funds. There were transfers labeled rent help, car payment, student loan, and countless others simply marked gift. I calculated the total of these smaller transfers over the past 10 years. It came to just over $95,000. $5,000. I had worked 2 jobs in college to graduate with manageable debt, while they had been quietly subsidizing my brother's entire adult life. He wasn't just living comfortably, he was living on a parental stipend, all while building a reputation as a high-flying investment banker. The rage that simmered inside me was cold and sharp. Their lectures to me about saving money and being self-sufficient were rank hypocrisy. But this was just the surface. I knew the bigger transactions wouldn't be so obvious. My father was too smart for that. I started digging into their investment accounts and credit card statements. That's where I found the next layer of the deception. There were payments to luxury car dealerships, down payments on condos Daniel had lived in, and even charges for his extravagant vacations, all paid for from a credit card in my father's name that Daniel was clearly using as his own. He wasn't just getting help. He was living a life entirely funded by them, a life he presented to the world as the fruit of his own genius. The most damning discovery, however, came from a folder labeled business loans. Inside, I found documentation for a line of credit my parents had taken out 5 years prior. The amount was for $250,000. The purpose stated on the application was home renovations. But I knew for a fact they hadn't done any major renovations on their house. They had talked about it, sure, but my mother could never settle on a design. I cross-referenced the dates of the loan disbursements with Daniel's life events. The first major withdrawal of $150,000 corresponded exactly with the time Daniel claimed to have started his own successful investment portfolio. The second, for $100,000, was withdrawn 2 years later, right around the time he made the down payment on his lavish downtown apartment, an apartment he boasted of buying with his market winnings. It wasn't a home renovation loan, it was seed money. It was the entire foundation of his supposed success. His career, his lifestyle, his reputation, it was all a lie bought and paid for by our parents. He wasn't a prodigy, he was a project. He was their most expensive and prized creation, and his success was their success. My blood ran cold. The scale of the deception was far greater than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This was a calculated, long-term fraud. They hadn't just neglected me, they had actively invested in a lie while leaving me to fend for myself. Every piece of advice, every comparison, every time they held Daniel up as an example to me, it was all part of the charade. As I sat there, the glow of the monitor illuminating the damning numbers, the front door buzzed. It was Sarah, right on time, holding a bag of Thai food. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Rob, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak at first. I just turned the monitor toward her. Her eyes widened as she scanned the spreadsheets. She saw the transfers, the credit card statements, the loan documents. She let out a low whistle. "Oh, Robert, this is so much worse than I thought." "It's all a lie, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. "His entire life, it's a lie. They bought it for him." We spent the next hour talking it through. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, immediately focused on the next step. "So what are you going to do with this?" she asked, her tone serious. "You can't just sit on this. This isn't just unfair, Rob. This is a level of manipulation that's pathological." She was right. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. The knowledge was a heavy weight, but it was also a source of power. For my entire life, I had been operating on incomplete data, trying to understand my place in a system whose rules were hidden from me. Now I had the complete dataset, I had the truth. And the truth demanded action. The quiet, second-choice son who always backed down, who always tried to earn their affection, was gone. In his place was a data analyst with a broken leg and a crystal-clear objective. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to dismantle their carefully constructed reality, piece by piece, using the very data they had inadvertently provided. My plan began to form, not out of a desire for petty revenge, but out of a need for a final, definitive reckoning. The numbers didn't lie, and I was going to make sure everyone saw them. The next few weeks were a period of intense, focused activity. My leg was healing, and with each day I could put a little more weight on it, a physical manifestation of the strength and resolve that were solidifying within me. My work-from-home arrangement became a blessing, giving me the time and privacy I needed to execute my plan. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was methodical. My grief had crystallized into a cold, hard purpose. I was conducting the most important analysis of my life, and the final report would be devastating. I began by organizing the financial data into a clear, undeniable narrative. I created charts and graphs. Hat visualized the flow of money from my parents to Daniel over the past decade. A bar chart showed the annual gifts. A pie chart broke down the categories of spending on the secret credit card, and a timeline starkly illustrated the correlation between the massive renovation loan and Daniel's major life purchases. I compiled bank statements, loan agreements, and credit card bills into a single, indexed PDF file. I even found the original real estate listing for Daniel's apartment, which proudly stated he had paid in cash, a boast that was now utterly transparent. It was a dossier of deceit, professionally presented and impossible to refute. But simply presenting the financial data wasn't enough. This wasn't just about money, it was about the lifelong pattern of emotional and financial neglect I had endured. So I added another layer to my audit. I went back through old family photo albums, scanning pictures from holidays, birthdays, and vacations. I used simple photo editing software to place a small red dot over Daniel's head and a small blue dot over mine. The visual result was stark. In almost every significant family picture, Daniel was front and center, arm in arm with our parents, beaming. I was often on the periphery, sometimes half out of the frame, an afterthought. I compiled these images into a slideshow, a visual representation of my role as the family's background character. Then I went through years of emails and text messages I had saved. I found the email where my father explained he couldn't co-sign for my modest student loan because it was important for a young man to build his own credit. I contrasted that with an email I found in his sent folder to Daniel just 6 months later where he said, "Don't worry about the down payment for the BMW, son. I've taken care of it." I put them side by side. I found the text from my mother canceling our lunch plans on my birthday because Daniel needed her to help him pick out a new sofa. I put that next to a screenshot of her Facebook post from that same day, showing off the $1,000 sofa they had bought for him. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall of irrefutable truth. I wasn't just building a case, I was building my own liberation. Sarah was my co-conspirator through it all. She would review my work, offering an outsider's perspective. "This is powerful, Rob," she said one night, looking at the finished presentation I had put together. "It's not just an accusation, it's proof. There's no way they can argue with this." "They will," I said. "They'll try to rationalize it, to call me ungrateful or jealous, but they won't be able to change the facts." The final piece of my plan was the venue. A private confrontation would be too easy for them. They could dismiss me, gaslight me, and sweep it all under the rug. I needed an audience. I needed to dismantle the public image they had so carefully crafted. My opportunity came in the form of an embossed invitation that arrived in the mail. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 35th wedding anniversary of George and Helen. They were hosting a large party at a fancy country club, a gathering of all their friends, business partners, and the family members to whom they presented their perfect life. It was the perfect stage. I began my preparations. I bought a small, high-definition projector and a portable screen. I loaded my presentation onto a laptop and a backup USB drive. I even wrote a script for myself not to read from, but to keep my thoughts clear and focused, to prevent my emotions from derailing the message. I wasn't going to yell or cry. I was going to be calm, factual, and methodical, just like in a business presentation. I was going to present my findings, the results of my quiet audit, and then I was going to walk away. The day before the party, Daniel called me. It was the first time he'd called since the accident. "Hey, little brother," he said, his voice oozing with false charm. "Heard you're finally off the crutches. Mom and Dad are expecting you at the party tomorrow. You are coming, right? It's a big deal for them." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, my voice even. "Great, and hey, try to look sharp, okay? A lot of important people will be there." The condescension in his voice, once a source of deep hurt, now just fueled my resolve. "Don't worry, Daniel," I said, a small, cold smile on my face. "I promise I'll make a memorable impression." I hung up the phone, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. The audit was complete. The presentation was ready. The stage was set for a final reckoning. The country club was exactly as ostentatious as I'd imagined. A grand ballroom with shimmering chandeliers, tables draped in white linen, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. My parents, Helen and George, stood near the entrance, greeting their guests. My mother was in an elegant silver gown, my father. Perfectly tailored tuxedo, they were the picture of grace and success. When they saw me, my mother's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before she resumed her hostess duties. "Robert, you made it," she exclaimed, giving me another one of her air kisses. "You're looking much better." "The leg is holding up," I said, my voice neutral. I was carrying a sleek laptop bag which I'd told them contained a gift. They didn't question it. My brother Daniel was already working the room, shaking hands and laughing his booming, artificial laugh. He gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder as I walked past. "Glad you could make it, Rob. See, told you to clean up nice." I just nodded and found a small, inconspicuous table near the back, close to a power outlet. Sarah was supposed to meet me here not as a guest, but as my getaway driver. She was waiting in the parking lot, ready for my signal. I sat through the dinner, picking at my food, a strange calm settling over me. I watched my parents and my brother bask in the admiration of their friends. I listened to the speeches, filled with glowing tributes to my parents' long and happy marriage, their business acumen, and their wonderful family. Every word of praise felt like a lie, a carefully constructed facade I was about to demolish. Finally, the moment came. My father stood up, tapped his glass with a fork, and called for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us," he began. "Helen and I are so blessed with wonderful friends, a wonderful life, and two wonderful sons who have made us so proud." He then gestured to Daniel. And now I believe Daniel would like to say a few words. Daniel stood up, grinning. He launched into a syrupy speech about our parents' love and support, how they had taught him the value of hard work and integrity. "They gave me the foundation to build my own success," he said, his voice thick with false sincerity. "And I am eternally grateful." As he finished to a round of applause, I stood up. "I'd like to propose a toast as well," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet room. All eyes turned to me. My parents looked surprised, Daniel slightly annoyed. "Of course, Robert," my father said, forcing a smile. "The floor is yours." I walked to the front of the room, setting my laptop on the lectern. "For 35 years, my parents have built a beautiful life," I began, my voice steady. "They've built a successful business, a lovely home, and a reputation for being pillars of the community. They are masters at building things. So tonight, in their honor, I'd like to present a little project I've been building myself." With a click of a button, the projector I had set up earlier whirred to life, casting a bright image onto the portable screen I had quickly unrolled. The title slide appeared in stark black and white: "The Family Ledger, a Financial and Emotional Audit." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. My parents' smiles vanished, replaced by looks of utter bewilderment. Daniel's face paled. "As a data analyst," I continued, my tone cool and professional, "I believe in the power of numbers to tell a story, so let's look at the data." I clicked to the next slide. It was the bar chart showing the $95,000 in direct transfers to Daniel over 10 years. This first chart shows a decade of gifts and financial assistance given to my brother to maintain his lifestyle. I clicked again. The pie chart of the secret credit card appeared, detailing over $60,000 spent on luxury goods, vacations, and expensive restaurants. This shows the additional subsidies, allowing him to project an image of wealth he did not earn himself. The room was silent now. The guests were staring at the screen, then at my parents, their expressions shifting from celebration to fascinated horror. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father's face was a mask of thunderous rage. But the most significant investment, I said, my voice unwavering, was this. I clicked to the slide detailing the $250,000 home renovation loan. I showed the loan agreement, the disbursement dates, and how they perfectly matched Daniel's supposed market winnings and apartment purchase. This is the $250,000 foundation of my brother's self-made success. Not hard work, not integrity. A lie funded by debt and deceit. I then moved to the emotional audit. The slideshow of family photos with the red and blue dots flashed on the screen, a pathetic visual story of my exclusion. I showed the side-by-side comparisons of the emails and text messages, highlighting the blatant hypocrisy. I saved the final slide for last. It was a single, powerful image, a photo of my parents and Daniel beaming at his promotion dinner taken from my mother's Facebook page. Next to it, I placed a photo I had asked Sarah to take in the hospital, me pale and hooked up to an IV with my leg in a cast. Above the two images, a simple cap. Tian priorities. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. No one knew where to look. The facade had not just been cracked, it had been pulverized. I looked directly at my parents and my brother. Their faces were a mixture of shock, humiliation, and pure fury. For the first time in my life, I saw them without their masks, and there was nothing but ugliness underneath. So I'd like to propose a toast, I said, picking up a glass of water from the lectern, to the truth, to a clean ledger, and to building a life based on something real. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Thank you for your time, and congratulations on 35 years. I turned off the projector, packed my laptop, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The stunned silence was broken only by the sound of my own steady footsteps. I walked out into the cool night air, took a deep breath of freedom, and sent Sarah a simple text. I'm ready. The drive away from the country club was quiet. Sarah didn't press me with questions. She just drove, letting the silence be a space for me to process. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, replaced by a profound and surreal sense of emptiness. It wasn't a bad emptiness, though. It was the clean, quiet emptiness of a room that has finally been cleared of all its clutter. The weight of a lifetime of seeking their approval, of twisting myself into knots to be seen by them, was gone. I had not just burned a bridge, I had nuked it from orbit. My phone started buzzing incessantly in my pocket. A barrage of texts and missed calls, first from my father, the messages escalating from "call me now" to a string of furious, incoherent threats. Then from my mother, a series of panicked, pleading texts. How could you do this to us? You've ruined everything. Please, we can fix this. And finally from Daniel, whose message was the most pathetic of all. You destroyed my life. You're a jealous monster. I read each one, and for the first time their words had no power over me. They were just noise. I turned my phone off. The fallout, as I learned later from a few sympathetic relatives who reached out, was catastrophic. My parents' anniversary party had imploded. Several of my father's business partners, men who valued reputation above all else, were appalled by the public display of deceit. The story of the family audit spread like wildfire through their social circle. The perfect image they had spent a lifetime cultivating was shattered in a single evening. My father lost a significant real estate deal in the aftermath, and my mother became a social pariah overnight. Daniel's fate was even more immediate. His reputation as a financial whiz was built on the lie of being self-made. Once the truth was out that his success was entirely bankrolled by his parents, his credibility at his investment firm evaporated. He was seen as a fraud, a man-child playing with his parents' money. Within a month, he was quietly let go. The luxury apartment, the fancy car, the entire lifestyle, it all began to crumble without the constant infusion of my parents' cash. They tried to contact me, of course. They sent letters. They left long, rambling voicemails. They even showed up at my apartment building once, but I refused to let them up. Their messages were a predictable mix of rage, blame, and half-hearted apologies that were always conditional. We're sorry if you felt left out, but you had no right to humiliate us like that. They still didn't get it. They never would. Their sorrow wasn't for how they had treated me. It was for the consequences of their public exposure. Severing ties with them was a legal and financial process as much as an emotional one. I hired a lawyer and formally dissolved any remaining financial connections, ensuring they couldn't entangle me in their now precarious finances. It was a clean break, a final closing of the ledger. The months that followed were about building a life on my own terms. My leg healed completely, leaving behind only a faint scar and a titanium rod as a souvenir. I focused on my work, my friendships, and my own well-being. I started hiking on weekends, exploring the trails outside the city, feeling the strength return to my body and my spirit. I reconnected with hobbies I had let slide, spending hours lost in books and complex coding projects that brought me genuine joy. My relationship with Sarah deepened. She had been there for me at my lowest point, a steadfast ally when my own family had abandoned me. Our friendship, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care, slowly blossomed into something more. She was the antithesis of my family, honest, dependable, and loving without condition. She saw me for who I was, not for what I could represent. One evening, about a year after the anniversary party, Sarah and I were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky. Why in hues of orange and purple? My phone, which I had long since turned back on, buzzed with a notification. It was a memory from 2 years ago, a photo of me standing awkwardly at a family barbecue on the edge of the frame while my parents and Daniel posed happily in the center. I looked at the picture, at the lonely young man who was so desperate to belong, and I felt a pang of sadness for him, but I didn't feel anger or bitterness anymore. I felt peace. "What is it?" Sarah asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I showed her the picture, just a reminder of how things used to be. She smiled softly. "Look how far you've come." She was right. I had spent my whole life trying to gain entry into their exclusive club, only to realize that true belonging couldn't be earned or quantified. It had to be given freely. In losing a family that never truly wanted me, I had gained myself. I had a life built not on a curated image, but on authentic connections. I had Sarah. I had friends who valued me. I had a quiet pride in my own, unsubsidized accomplishments. The ledger was finally clean, the books were balanced, and for the first time I felt truly, genuinely rich. I deleted the old photo, took Sarah's hand, and turned back to watch the sunset. The future was an open spreadsheet, and I was ready to fill it with my own data.